has
Oh,
claim to
really?
fame. He's
Yeah.
the winner of the 2015 Jewish Book Award in Visual Arts for Skies of Parchment, Seas of Ink, Jewish Illuminated Manuscripts. It's a very long title, Mark. He is the product of a mixed marriage between scions of Slonimer and Lubavitcher Hassidim and Romanian socialists, and grew up rather confused but happy in Brooklyn, New York. He's currently professor of religion at Vassar College, where they have students on campus and have classes in person, I'm told, and online,
Yeah.
where he's been teaching since 1992 and was the first director of Jewish studies at Vassar. He teaches courses on medieval Christianity, religion, arts, politics, and Jewish texts and sources. And once a month on Rosh Chodesh, he gets dressed up in a Jewish occult outfit and walks around campus and teaches students in a dark part of the campus about Judaism and the occult. We will now join Mark as we learn about the Dybbuk. Mark, it's yours.
You know, the interesting thing about Ari Katz is that any 5 statements of his will, of course, include a statement that is utterly false. So my challenge to you is to consider all the wonderful things he said and to and to determine for yourselves when he is totally pulling your leg. So it's really nice to see you guys. We're here for our second session of Jews on the Dark Side. I really enjoyed doing it last time. I enjoyed your questions. This time we'll be talking about the Dybbuk. And I guess you could say we'd be talking about Dybbukim. But the fact is, as we'll see, that the film, the 1937 film based on the earlier play by Ansky, sort of took over Dybbuk studies, and you can't really think about the Dybbuk without having those images and those words in your mind. So you see here an image that I'll discuss later that comes directly, in a way, its genealogy is directly from the play and the film. And I just want to begin with this. It's the Klezmatics from their album Possessed. Klezmatics album Possessed was produced in the wake of a production of the Dybbuk, which was freshly retranslated quite poetically by Tony Kushner. It was at the Public Theater in New York in the 90s, and I saw it once and I had to see it again the next week because the sets and the costumes and the music with the Klezmatics on the stage were so wild and evocative. And I'm glad I saw it because there's not a single still that I can find, you can look, and no videos of this performance that I know of. This quotation is the epigraph at the beginning of S. Ansky's play, The Dybbuk. And as you can see, it's in Hebrew and Aramaic. There's an Aramaic line, Igra Rama, from the highest castle, the highest palace, the highest heights. Levira Amikta, to the darkest basement. And this is actually a theological issue in question, as of course, all these, strange creatures and dark beings in Judaism come to answer some theological question. The question is, if the soul is so happy being with God, why does it come down to live in these, and I know I'm speaking for myself, extremely frail bodies on earth, right? And that is this, the epigraph answers in order to raise up those into which it has descended. This talks about the sparks of the divine. Okay. Of course, more mundanely, I might quote Batman Begins, a 2005 film, in which Bruce Wayne's father asks him, "Why do we fall, Bruce?" And that is the question, isn't it? I feel a little intimidated because you have in your community, Ari, a great authority on these matters, Rabbi Eli Kaplan-Spitz, who is the rabbi of CBI and has written a great book called "Does the Soul Survive?", which talks about his own experiences with death in people to whom he has offered pastoral care and stories he's heard. It's a wonderful book, and you should have a look at it. And in a way, I feel that perhaps he should be giving this this talk. But here I am, and here we are. When we talk about, to begin with, the soul. Right? Why does the soul, haneshama, come down from above? You have to be aware that there are several ways of talking about parts of human beings that are not in the corporeal realm. So Judaism collectively and over time developed an idea of the body and something beyond it. Now, unlike in Christianity, where this was largely oppositional, and one had to favor the soul in over the body, traditionally throughout most of the existence of Judaism, the religion, they were very much intertwined. That didn't mean that one needn't be concerned with spiritual matters. What it meant was that it was essential to consider how the body and soul were connected. In fact, the earliest stratum, nefesh, that's a biblical Hebrew word. It occurs 754 times in the Hebrew Bible. And most of the times in which it occurs, and this is why we get into trouble with theology, is it refers to a human life, right? Nefesh means simply a breath, right? Something that has breath within it. And it's often translated as soul or spirit, but it really should be translated as person, right? It really should be translated as life, because nefesh can also represent animal life. So that's the point at which the upper and the lower meet and kiss, so to speak. Another term you'll see in the Hebrew Bible is ruach. Ruach is something that comes into the body from beyond it. It is probably more truly the soul, right? Probably cognate with the Greek pneuma, right? And nefesh might be psyche, right? You see this in all religions, the idea of a wind that comes from beyond and animates the human, and then the human breathes, right? So that's another sort of level of spirit or soul. Nefesh means living being. Ruach, literally wind, right, is, I guess you could say, spirit. Then you have neshama, which is breath, right? And these are different ways of describing what we would call the soul or the spirit, the invisible, divinely connected part of ours, of us, I should say. In Kabbalistic and mystical literature, there are other levels. You can talk about chaya, that is life, that is inextricably tied to the chiyut, the existence of God. And you can talk about yichidah, the singularity, where human beings and God actually, I wouldn't say they come together. There's a problem with that in Jewish mysticism. We don't have the idea of unio mystica, where the mystic becomes one with God, but there's an association or identification of humans with the divine. And then someplace in this whole equation, there is something called Dybbuk. Dybbuk is not a thing. It is a situation or a state. Dybbuk comes from the root ledabek, to stick, right? I have some Gorilla Glue here to remind you what we're talking about. And it is when a soul clings to a body, or conversely, a soul clings to something out of the body. So one of the aspirations of Hasidic Judaism, as you may know, is dvekus, that is to get close, to get tight with the divine, to stick to, sometimes translated as to cleave unto, right, God. But there are occasions in which souls that don't belong into bodies, according to this tradition, force their way into bodies and subjugate or sublimate, subdue, conquer, imperialize that body for the new soul. And this only happens, according to the tradition, under extraordinary conditions. Now, we should understand to begin with that I'm sorry, I'm probably the worst person to give these talks, because I myself am a pretty strict Maimonidean rationalist. That is, if it doesn't make sense, it's not Jewish, okay, right? So, you know, if you ask me, do I believe in this? No, right? Is it good to think with? Yes. Now, here's it. Do I believe in this? No. Does it occur? Yes. So if it occurs, how come you don't believe in it? I don't believe in it as a dybbuk, a ownerless soul, or a freed soul, or a free-form soul entering into the wrong body. But I believe in it as a psychological, religious, and sociological phenomenon, which it most indubitably is. Okay. Now, Ari was joking last time about Halloween, which, you know, we can't even mention, right? Because it's a Goyish holiday and Jews don't celebrate it, of course. But, you know, there was another fall holiday in which all the Mishigas of Halloween was rolled up for Jews. And that was the last day of Sukkot, right? A secular day, so to speak. It's during the festival, but it's not, it's a day of Chol HaMoed, right? And it's the last day of the Sukkot holiday. And because it was known to be the ultimate sealing of divine judgment, sealing, not tikra sealing, but sealing, right? Stamping of divine judgment for people. And it's so characteristic of his Judaism. My wife loves to say that, you know, you think you're getting judged on Rosh Hashanah, but then they move it to Yom Kippur, right? And then Hoshana Rabbah is the end of the period, right? You could probably get a reprieve until Hanukkah if you wanted to, right? So Hoshana Rabbah is understood to be that definitive day. People stayed up all night and learned Torah, a very ancient tradition which goes back to the very years that coffee was first imported into Europe and into Italy, where they started to hold these Hoshana Rabbah vigils. And in Eastern Europe and in Germany, Hoshana Rabbah was really the equivalent of All Hallows Eve. It was believed that all the souls got together to be judged on that night. And that if you went out on Hoshana Rabbah night and placed a silver bowl on the ground, half filled with water, and said the appropriate psalms, and then gazed into the bowl, if you saw yourself without a head, it would mean that you would not live out the year. Right? So don't do that. It's probably not a good idea. I mean, you know, if you're curious, you might want to do it, but it's probably it probably won't avail you in the way that you would like to. So, you know, Hoshana Rabbah was the time in which the cemeteries, right, were places that, you know, all kinds of superstitions about passing cemeteries and being in cemeteries and having to wash your hands, and Tilas Yadayim when you left the cemetery, right? Hoshana Rabbah, they became especially scary places. And it's no wonder that the general Gentile folksy ideas about cemeteries were incorporated into Jewish practice, Judaized. These are things that everybody feels in almost all human societies, that the dead are jealous of the living, so we have to be careful about them, right? That they're around, that they're watching over us. They may have gone to another place, but they're actually also sort of here. And Hoshana Rabbah was a day that reified those feelings. Well, I think it began as a sort of Hoshana Rabbah prank, but great Yiddish writer, and he wrote in Hebrew a little bit too. Shlomo Zanvil Rappaport, S. Ansky, who was born in Vitebsk. You know that area because another very famous, important person was born in Vitebsk. Who was that? Marc Chagall. Okay, and he died in Otwock in Poland. So 1863 to 1920. He called himself Ansky or Ansky. He had a lot of pseudonyms. I don't know if you know this about Ansky, but he also called himself Svidbin and Sinani and Sinanai, right? He, like I.B. Singer many years later, delighted in these sort of dark tales. And here he is. He's a thinker, you know, in the mold of Shalom Aleichem and Mendel Malcher Sfarim. There was a certain style of that period. Actually, this wonderful portrait, which is at YIVO, appears on the cover of an excellent book by Gabriela Safran called Wandering Soul, the Dybbuk's Creator, Ansky. What was unique and interesting about Ansky, among other things, was that he was an anthropologist and an ethnographer. And he spent a lot of time going throughout the far reaches of Russia, Poland, and collecting both objects and artifacts and stories and songs. And he really, you know, if you read the Dybbuk and you see the film even, there's a tremendous amount of lore and law that is part of his repertoire or arsenal. He was also famous for writing the anthem of the Jewish labor bund, which was called the Shvua. The words are his. Cheery. Right, so these were his words, and in a way he became a great hero, both because of the Dybbuk and this song. And what's interesting is that when he died, he was memorialized. Sorry. Oh, no. Bye. Enough. Okay. He was memorialized in a mausoleum in which Peretz, I.L. Peretz, Yugamet Peretz, was memorialized in Warsaw, and also Dinitzan, who's not as famous, but you know, he was like Shalom Aleichem, like Mendel Malcher Sfarim, not, I wouldn't say a hero of the common people, but a hero of the intellectual elites in Eastern Europe of this time. His play, the Dybbuk, is fabulous. It became the most celebrated play in the history of Yiddish and Hebrew theater. It was produced countless times. And as I said, it was based on his ethnographic explorations. He went in Jewish towns, small independent Jewish towns called shtetl in Western Russia, just before World War I, when everything in those places was destroyed. He wrote the play in Russian, and then he translated himself into Yiddish. He lost his Yiddish manuscript when he fled from Bolshevik Russia, and then this is crazy. He had to reconstruct it based on a Hebrew translation that Chaim Nachman Bialik had made, right? So talk about, you know, when you push, wait, 1 second. Oh, Ari, I lost my whole PowerPoint. Okay, so if something like that would happen, right? And you, Nancy, I gotcha. Okay, so if something like that would happen and you would lose your whole PowerPoint, right, and have to reconstruct it, right? I depend on my computer to be my memory, right? And yet he was able to do this because Bialik had translated it. The play was never staged by Ansky. He died suddenly. There were thousands of mourners who, and in front of his grave at the Warsaw cemetery, the director of the Vilna troupe, as it was called, Mordechai Matzo, vowed to open Ansky's play at the end of his Shiva. And the play premiered on December 9th in Warsaw, just as it was planned. It was, you know, it was a play that was hedged about, of course, by all these promises, and itself was incredibly anticipated. And the story is no doubt. Oh, 1 second, I lost my my image here. 1 second, let me try to get it back.
That's what you get for playing with spirits. I want to make sure you know that.
Playing with spirits. 1 second, let me try to get this image back and the music back. Okay. Hold on. Okay. Well, I don't have it, but I could tell you just very briefly. It's set in the Jewish shtetl called Brinitz. It's we don't really know where that is, and it is the story of Leah, the daughter of the very rich man Sender, whose suitors are constantly faced with new demands until they despair. There's Hanan, who's obviously in love with Leah, and he hears that all these proposals for Leah are coming to nothing, right? But Sender eventually announces that he has closed the deal. And Hanan is shocked, and something dawns on him, and he is ecstatic, right? And he falls to the floor, and Hanan is dead, and he's clasping a mystical angelic book in his hand. And we'll see a variance of this from the movie, in which it's made very much more dramatic. He calls upon Satan. Leah's wedding day arrives. There is a humble feast held for the poor, and Leah dances with beggars, right? This is already an interesting expressionistic situation, because you have the bride in white dancing with the crooked, disabled, poor beggars, and there's a sort of grotesqueness about this contrast. It's not exactly a politically correct scene, but then she and her nurse start to talk about souls who die prematurely. And her nurse, who's raised her since her mother died, tells her and sings her a story of her mother's wedding day. And this is beautifully performed by the Klezmatics in that album. And the translation is Ansky's text, retranslated by Tony Kushner. His nurse is singing to her.
Soon to the canopy you will be there. Your mother arrives from the world of the dead, and she comes to your wedding in silver and gold. She offers her hand for the angels to hold. Oh, Hanuel's daughters, the glorious bride, does Hanuel glitter with gold or with pride? And Hannah, your mother, says, bursting with joy, my Leah is marrying a wonderful boy. But suddenly, Hanuel, why do you sigh? And why does your heart break? And why do you cry? Strangers are leading the bridal parade, while I stand unseen, alone and afraid.
The music was super, it was so effective.
the living are dancing with those that they see, and only the dead will be dancing with me. And the daughter of Hannah is married that day to the bridegroom who's waiting to dance her away. And as the klezmorim they sing and they play, and all through the dancing the spirits they stray. Prophet Elijah, he dances and sings, and silver and gold are the blessings he brings. And shekels is like over the prophet's gold cup, and the dead and the living, oh God will rise. Soon to the canopy you will be led. Your mother arise from the world of the dead.
Very dramatic scene, okay, and not an auspicious scene. By the way, I wanted to show you, I'm sorry, from the film, this is Hanan discovering that he will not be able to marry Leah.
In Verweise, Fremde schreibt Neue. Reimu ist mir sich zu fuhren mit Kolis. Neun. Wie kann es sein? In 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nein. Ein Sporen. Das Wort Temes im Isberguden. 36 ist Reims. 36 ist die Zahl von Leh. 3 mal 36. 8. Ronnen, freie Macht. Wo Hashem, nicht Gott. Ist durch Gott, durch Weben, Teufel, 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 Kind, ich beschwöre dich.
Right, so that's where we are, right? So what happens is that Leah visits the holy grave of these two locals who were killed during the Khmelnytsky massacres in 1648. She invites the souls of her mother and her grandparents to come and celebrate. And meanwhile, her intended, whose name is Menashe, arrives with his father. But as soon as he tries to lift the veil to give her a bracha, she pushes him back and screams in a man's voice. And there's a character called the messenger who appears intermittently in the play, who announces she's been possessed by a Dybbuk. And the rest of the story is the appeal to the local tzaddik, the appeal to the local Hasidic Rebbe to exorcise the Dybbuk, which eventually happens with tragic consequences. Now, why has this Dybbuk possessed Leah? It is because Sender was an old friend of a fellow named Nissen. They were close, and this is how the play and how the film begins with this prologue. You don't find it out in the play until the fourth act. And they swore to each other that if one would father a son and the other a daughter, they would be married to each other. And they did not fulfill that promise because of various tragic events, and this is the result. So the whole thing is about promises unkept There's a strong undercurrent about wealth and poverty. You know, there's of course the extremely romantic sort of stratum of the guy who really ultimately does not get the girl in the worst way. And it's all woven together and held together by the glue of these oral traditions and customs of Podonia and Volhynia and the Pale of Settlement, and you know, and all these places that Ansky had visited as an ethnographer. My friend Nathaniel Deutsch, who's a historian, wrote a book about the maid of Ludmir, who was a female Hasidic Rebbe, and she was rumored also to be possessed by a Dybbuk. We'll talk about that in a little while, women and Dybbukim, and she might have formed some of the basis for this story. There were many performances, beginning with some quite early ones, the one by the Vilna troupe, and the stills are just wonderful. I mean, both for the costumes, which themselves form a pocket ethnography, and the expression. So when we say something is expressionistic, we mean that it's highly exaggerated. The face becomes a mask, right? This is the least of it, but if you see others, right, the sort of classic image here of Leah, who's with this long, that's no, the Yiddish word, oh, it's an English word, braid, right, down her back, or two braids, right? She's the young maiden, but she is possessed by the spirit of this unborn son. But she's, excuse me, I'm thinking of the original promise. I'm sorry. She's possessed by the spirit of Hanan, right? By this male spirit, and so she takes on this dramatic and stern aspect, right? And even in the scenes at the wedding, right? And this is Frada here. This is Leah. You can see that she's sort of brooding and gazing into the middle distance. The film, which was produced in 1937, is a masterpiece of expressionism. It's based on the Habima stage production, which was the second production after the original Warsaw production, which was a month after Ansky's funeral. The Habima Theater used Bialik's translation, but they had a lot of trouble producing it in Israel because of a conflict between Shoshana Avivit, who was a very diva-esque young actress, and the person that they really wanted, an older actress, a woman named Hannah Rovina, and she eventually plays the part in the film as well. Habima performed this like a zillion times, 300 times in the Soviet Union, 292 times in Moscow, and sometimes outside. It was staged countless times in under the British mandate. And there was a German language premiere translated to many different languages. In 1977, it premiered at the Public Theater in a very important production that we'll see in a few seconds. But these original stills from a number of places, the original Habima production, the productions in Germany, and eventually in 1977 in New York. This is Al Hirschfeld. I don't know if you are familiar with his cartoons that used to appear every weekend in the arts and leisure section of the New York Times, in which you'd have to find his daughter Nina's name in the, here's a Nina, written in the characters. This was the 1977 production. And the story was so popular that it even was transmogrified into a children's book. Now, I ordered this book to have a look at, but I don't think that the story is a story for children in any way. But you could see this, the popularity. And of course, it appears in art. Now, what's interesting is that before the Ansky play. And before the film and before the multiple productions, there had been, in Jewish tradition for a long time, the idea of dybbukim. It doesn't spring fully formed from the head of Ansky. Ansky, as I say, took it from his ethnographic wanderings. And so you have artists like Moshe Ephraim Lillian here in the mid-19th century. And this image is called the Dybbuk. And it shows a young man bearing on his back a skeleton, which is fresh from the grave, right? And it's a comment on the burden of youth, right? How young people are weighed down with ancestral traditions, and the idea that one would be possessed by the spirit of something different than oneself and coerced into behaving certain ways was a commentary on the old and the new. I showed you a Lillian last time of the vampiric sweatshop owner, Jewish sweatshop owner, sucking the blood from the workers, right? That was one theme in Lillian's work, which was labor. This is about the burden of traditions, and that's how the Dybbuk was thought of before. But since Ansky's play, the expressionistic depictions from here, a very early advertisement for a Vilna troupe performance of the Dybbuk at the Queen's Theater in 1926. 1926, it's 6 years after it was first performed in Warsaw. It's already being played in Queens. There was an estimate at one point that 1 out of every 5 people had seen the Dybbuk, every 5 Jews of the world, I should say. But again, the high foreheaded, effeminate yeshiva student, the Chana Ravina looking young woman here becomes an integral part of the way the story is thought of. Here's some of the original advertising for the Vilna troupe performance in Vilna. And again, it's a masterpiece of expressionism. And what's interesting is that the question for an artist in depicting a Dybbuk, you can't depict a Dybbuk. A Dybbuk is an interior phenomenon, a phenomenon of, we'd say, of the brain, right? So the problem is how to do that. So you have the dead Hanan and the live Leah, right? In films, you can have Leah speak in a masculine voice, etc. But in art, the expression is more difficult. Some of the earlier posters, this is 1938, right? Near the beginning of the war. It's a poster for a French showing of the film, and now it's very much, much more literalistic and less expressionistic, although they're trying to achieve that. Times have shifted. This is a play that was probably begun in 1913, right? Which had its debut in 1920. By 1936, right? You were looking for some other way to think about the story. And so there's a sort of equal emphasis between the exotic rabbi here with his head phylactery and this and the Chana Ravina looking character. Again, in the 1977 production at the Public Theater, the dance of the poor, which we'll see, and the dance of death were clearly based in and sprung from the film. The film does this absolutely beautifully. It bases itself on earlier stage productions, but there's a constant communication back and forth between the film and new productions. And what you see here, one of the wonderful features of the 1977 production was that the poor, who become actually the spirits that Leah is dancing with, had these amazing expressionistic masks, which you can see. And she already, has been possessed by the Dybbuk. Contemporary art attempts to deal with this more or less successfully. This is a John Fenton. I happen to like John Fenton, but I find it a confusing image to look at. It's trying to convey the intertwining of the Dybbuk with its victim, but I don't think it does that particularly successfully. This anonymous work is, it's anonymous to me because I don't know the source. It was used as advertising for a production in Philadelphia, is a little bit more successful. We see Leah with the outline internally of this male figure, and in the corner is the shofar. Now, the shofar is very important. It's used in exorcism rituals. If you think of the story of the Dybbuk as a topos, it is like a mashup between Romeo and Juliet, that is tragic, doomed romance, and Romeo and Juliet and The Exorcist, right? I mean, it's a strange combination. But one of the things in the phenomenon of dybbukim, and this has been discussed at length by Rachel Elior in a wonderful book about dybbuks and women, is the idea that a woman in a society where women had very little voice could articulate her own needs, could speak with authority. Of course, she had to do it by appropriating a male voice, right? But, you know, the connection of the maid of Ludmir, this Hasidic, female Hasidic Rebbe, with Dybbukism is that people could not understand how a woman spoke with such authority. So they said she must have a Dybbuk in her. She must be possessed, be filled with a man. And there's something Freudian there, of course. There's something Jungian in it too, right? It's a profoundly psychological and socio-political, and dare we say, proto-feminist concept as well. And it actually explains the fact that the shofar is what drives the Dybbuk out. The Dybbuk is driven out of the body by the sound of the shofar, because the sound of the shofar is the earliest, most ineluctable, almost inarticulately articulate sound of tradition. You want to say tradition, right? And the Dybbuk, I must say, was Fiddler on the Roof before there was a Fiddler on the Roof. In other words, it was the thing that every Jew knew about, regardless of religious affiliation or background, regardless of socioeconomic status, right? What pulls the Dybbuk out? What reverts the woman to her normative state of disenfranchisement and powerlessness and voicelessness? It's the sound of the shofar. So for me, this image, which I'm still trying to source, is a powerful one because it conveys that. In a sense, all contemporary performances of the Dybbuk harken back to the film and the movie. And of course, there are revivals, so to speak. Revival is a word that we have to use cautiously in this context. The revivals have done everything you would expect them to do. Put people in cheap suits and raincoats, have topless women holding up the chuppah. There have been some Israeli ones that are cheesy because they're all about the threat of orthodoxy and Haredism toward the female, right? This idea of the Dybbuk, of the possessed female who has this power in her possession to put down the traditional community, has a very strong resonance, as you can see in many places. Some performances are creepier than others, some are dumber than others. I've never, ever seen anything as good as the film, which is why I'm going to show you a bigger clip as we go along. And I've never seen anything as good as the stage production with Tony Kushner's translation. But they've been done over the years and continue to be done. There's even an opera based, at which you see here, based on the Dybbuk. One of the most innovative recent performances was a Canadian production that involved marionettes, which had always behind them, live people on the stage in Japanese style. But even here you see the eyebrows, the pallor, the underlined eyes, right? It all comes directly from the film. The opera called The Dybbuk, Between Two Worlds. I just want to give you a sense of the atmospherics of it. Let's hope this works, okay. Premiered in Pittsburgh, believe it or not. Move you on just a little bit so you can see. If you just see a little light, that's what you're supposed to be seeing. Right, so it owes its expressionistic look to the film. A vaguely klezmer-esque score. And it follows the story fairly traditionally. I'm having problems with the video. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm not gonna linger on it. But Leonard Bernstein, of course, famously made a ballet called the Dybbuk Suite. It then was later just called Dybbuk. It was choreographed by Jerome Robbins, and it was a sleeper at the New York City Ballet. It never became a tremendously popular ballet, but the music is pretty stunning. Have a listen. Starts with Havdalah. See the drum. The Dybbuk expressionist style, as I call it, is pervasive. So it is no more clearly articulated than in the wedding scenes and dances. And these I have to show you. So I beg your indulgence to watch a larger segment here.
Zeit zu der größten Mitzwe, mein Kind.
Here she is in her wedding dress. This is the messenger who's observing all this.
Ein Mensch darf sehen, was tut. Man hat mir noch nicht geöffnet die Augen. Drei Tupfendamen, repeat. Ой, буду не стой, дай мою וסוי פוי ליופו. Einzig narrischer Mensch ist dein Mien, dein Opfer. Du steu dir dein Läufen, dein Schnappen, dein Jugend, als dein Gebein wird es sei wie zum Käfer tun. Es wird nicht helfen, kein Philistisch, kein Geweih, als du's lebt, mir soll immer vergehen. In hast die dein Freit, wirst die euch wenden in Gichen, du's Leben für ein Mensch, ist ja teuten Tanz geglichen.
The Dance of the Dead was a topos of European folklore. Here it is at the wedding. Probably the most famous scene in Jewish theater. Tremendous drama and tremendous expression. Nothing could really equal what was seen on the screen. But in the 1977 production at the Public Theater, and in Maurice Sendak's wonderful illustration I began with for Tony Kushner's translation of Dybbuk, you see the influence of Hannah Ravina. Now, Hannah Ravina, when she was selected for the role in the Bima Theater, originally was recovering from tuberculosis in a sanatorium north of Moscow, and she left. She escaped the sanatorium to perform on the stage. And so if you wonder how she achieved that deathly pallor, it's because she was really, really sick. And, you know, these are deathless images. When you see these images, you understand that in contemporary productions, I think the black and white has something to do with it, right? You could almost not equal that. I regret to tell you that in 2015, a film called Demon was produced. I have not seen the film, but I have seen the stills. It involves a demonic bride. It involves a wedding in a cathedral. It involves various shirtless Dybbuk analogs. It looks really terrible, but even that, right, has as its fonses et origo, its origin and beginning, the wonderful 1937 film. And Hannah Ravina was legendary. Now, when somebody is legendary and somebody is so over the top, she can be caricatured by Al Hirschfeld, sure, but she can also be wonderfully caricatured by some friends of yours from a previous CSP production, which are the wonderfully talented folks at the Israeli series, The Jews Are Coming. I'd like you to see Hannah Ravina here visiting the doctor.
אז אתה מבין, זה שורש ההבדל בין פיסורה לבין דחורים. תודה רבה. טוב, תודה. הבא בתור. רובינה, חנה.
קראת לי דוקטור?
כן, מה הבעיה?
אויה הגזרה שנפלה עליי דוקטור, דיבוק השתלט על גופי המוחלש. לא נרקוד סביב עץ התפוח, מושיטה ידיי אני לריק ושן משחת מענני.
כן, עוד משהו?
בשיעור.
טוב, בואי תסתכלי עליי בבקשה. עליי, גברת רובינה? לא, עליי, אני פה. אני פה. שלום. תעשי
Expressionism.
אוקיי, תסתכלי על האצבע שלי.
אינני מבינה.
תעקבי אחרי האצבע שלי עם העיניים.
אבל מה המניע שלי להסתכל על האצבע?
סליחה?
האם אני כועסת עליה? האם אני מאוהבת בה? האם אני חושדת בה? האם אני רוצה להרע לה?
בואי שבי על המיטה בבקשה. אני אתן לך עכשיו מכה קטנה עם הפטיש על הרגל, זה כדי לבדוק את התגובה שלך, אוקיי?
כל היום בו הכיתני עם פטיש קטן קטן.
התגובה הטבעית של הרגל.
בסדר גמור.
גברת רובינה, ובכן מדובר בצינון.
אויה, הגזרה שנפלה עליי, דיבוק הצינון שהשתלט על גופי המוחלש. לא נרקוד סביב עץ התפוח.
אין דיבוק! שום דיבוק! לא היה דיבוק! רק צינון!
ואיך השגתי את הצינון הזה?
נדבקת בו.
ארור דיבוק זה שנותן מנוח לגופי היגע, והביא את המשולח הזה להודות כי דיבוק נדבק בקלה.
כמה ימי מחלה?
3 בבקשה.
Silly, but wonderful. Okay. And of course, you know, it ends badly because, not because of Dybbukim and demons, it ends badly because women who are uppity must necessarily end badly. But it ends interestingly because it ends with an exorcism. Now, you might ask, is it the case that in Orthodox Judaism today, or perhaps Haredi Judaism, that is so-called ultra-Orthodox Judaism, there might be cases of Dybbukim, which just as in certain wild corners of the Catholic Church would be dealt with via exorcisms, they might be dealt with also via exorcisms. And the answer is yes. Interestingly, this is something that occasionally finds its way into the Israeli press, but I haven't heard of a case, interestingly, in the past maybe 20 years where psychologists also weren't consulted. So, you know, it's interesting. I have a friend who's a psychologist who works with ultra-Orthodox people, and you know, I don't know what exorcisms look like in the 21st century. I actually was privileged to be privy to an exorcism that took place around 1983 in Jerusalem, and it was pretty traditional, but it didn't have sort of the humiliating effect. The victim of the demonic possession was not raving, was not restrained, right? They just they said the psalms they had to say, and lit black candles and blew black shofars. Apparently, it still goes on, but it is one of those things that I think in the 21st century, in our own lifetime, part of my lifetime, really, really have declined, and it's a symptom of the inroads that medicine is apparently making, although not COVID awareness in some cases, in all walks of ultra-Orthodox life. But in in the story of the Dybbuk, in the play and in the film, the exorcism is quite dramatic.
Neben den Städten, Häfen den Säulen, klappern im ersten Kehle uns auf die See erloschen. Jetzt heute, als wir der Suchen größten Zabit Rebitzel in Europa leer, schickt mir beten bei dir nicht nur das Versterben, wunderbar fällt, du sollst durchfällen, dass du deine dir bekannt. Oh, so dem Mester, wissen wir nicht, als der besten Zedek von Europole, ist ihm kommen zu dem teure Heil. Kachtos allein, dem Kiew.
So here's the
Hat
scene.
mich die Entfer kommen. Nissen ben Rifke hat dem Psagdin nicht ungenommen.
Ich erzähle in die Höhe Romans, ich mein Gäuser gewinn anders. Wir sprechen im Zartin. Sender, schickte ich von ja die fünfte Färbung und getan im Kosten. Augen im Jutze Hashem und Stern Kuppe. Der Kosten soll kommen bei Zeiten.
Der Husen wird kommen bei Zeiten.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Ah, this is really a fascia. Okay. Hold on. Here she is.
Musst du erholst.
Ich bin nicht herein.
Du Kedusha. Hinter mir Schuss. In eurem Namen und mit eurer Macht heraustreiben vom Ruf von einer jüdischen Tochter Ruhe, was will ich daraus bekommen?
Wir lieben eure Schuss, unser Namen, mit unserer Macht, ausreiben, in Ruf einer jüdischen Tochter, Aua, was will ich euch bekommen?
Dybbuk, der Schone von einem Menschen, was ist weg von unserer Welt, in Namen und mit der Macht von der heiligen Rede Jiden, bin ich Hasir ben Hodel, Geuser auf dir, du sollst verlosen dem Ruf und der Psule Leibas Chano, und nicht, wenn ihr dich mal grün.
Ich furcht mich nicht, Harayre Kvule sind herum.
So finally, the excommunication occurs.
Im Namen und mit der Schutz von der heiligen Rede Jiden, sei sich, dass wir von Hodos die letzte Fähigkeit, was verbinden sich mit unserer lebendigen Welt und mit dem Gut und mit der Mischung von der Psule Leibas Chano. Und ihr bin dich אחים, הם כבר ישראל. Ich kann sich mehr nicht strangeln. Ist sie runter, sucht noch mehr Kaddisch. Sander, sag dem ersten Kaddisch.
And so it ends. Leah, of course, dies as a result of the Dybbuk leaving her. And of course, the Dybbuk problem is solved, but her problem is not solved. The society's problem is not solved. I feel these days a little bit like Leah at the end, where she says, I have no more kayach, I have nothing more to give, I cannot cope any longer, but I hope for resolutions and more hopeful days. And I'm here for you and happy to hear any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. So we have time for just a few questions. People have posted a lot of stuff, so I'll try to get through it, but let me just confirm again. So when it comes to Dybbuk, and it looks like from non-Jewish possessions, it's only women who get possessed?
There are some cases of men being possessed by Dybbukim. Yossi Chayas, who's another friend of CSP, wrote a wonderful book about demons and demon possession. And he has, it seems that there was a certain point in the High Middle Ages where things shifted, and it really became a sociological answer to the disempowerment of women. I think, if women are disempowered at any point in history, they feel it and they react. But this is a very, it's a very, I would say, clever, theological way of reacting. That is saying, well, if I speak with the voice of the man, you have to accept the authority of what I say, even if you don't accept my person. But it ended badly for many of those quote unquote possessed women.
I will say I went to Camp Yavne in the from 1978 to like 1987, and they had plays every summer. And one summer they did the Dybbuk, and I just thought it was the strangest play to do at a summer camp. First of all, I had no idea what was going on, and it was very boring to me, but very strange to do on a summer camp stage.
I have to read that children's book. What could they possibly be doing?
People have asked, do you have a text of Jewish excommunication materials they could use? So I guess a lot of people online have been chatting of their personal experiences with possession, not themselves, but other people, of course.
Okay. Well, there is a book by a fellow named Azriel Ben Sadok called Walking Through the Fire, it's really a darker side guide. It has translations of all these kinds of texts. The Pulsa Denura, for instance, the death curse, the famous death curse that's occasionally invoked in Israeli politics by Kabbalists against their opponents, and various demonological, including solutions for possession. So yes, those texts exist and they've been translated. There are, if you go in Jerusalem in Kikar Shabbat to Lichtenstein and Holder, and right at the edge of Mea Sharim, it's a bookstore. They have a Kabbalah section in the back, right, where you're not allowed to go, of course. And I picked up a number of very interesting things there, including a couple of volumes of all the divine names, a book by a famous Italian rabbi of the 18th century, Moshe Zacuto. I think this is the 18th. There were several Zacutos. In that book, there's an index. It's a new edition, so it has an index, and you can look up, to make someone love you, use this name on this amulet. To kill, it says, use this name. And the whole book is prefaced by a long introduction that says, essentially, don't try this at home, folks, right? So there are such recipe books if one seeks them out.
Right. As CSP patrons, we will provide you with demon possession services from Marc Michael Epstein as part of your patron if you need it. I just want to make sure you know that.
My pleasure.
We will fly you to, depending on what level you donate, we will fly you to Upper Poughkeepsie.
Upper.
And Mark will make sure the students are available with their shofars, and we will help you. It's not a big deal.
Always say shofar, so good.
High level. Before you unshare your screen, which people have asked you to do, they would like you to explain the image that you have shared with us at the end, and then please unshare the screen.
So this is from the cover of a book, edited by Joachim Neugerschau, great translator, called Jene Welt, The Other World. It was published by my cousin of blessed memory, died very, very young, Jeffrey Steinberg at Stonehill Publishing. And it's been published several times since as Great Tales of the Jewish Occult and something Magic in the Occult or something like that. And in that book, there's a translation of the Dybbuk and a translation of the story of the Golem and a fabulous story, which if you haven't read, you must read, called The Tower of Rome. Talk about bizarre stories, but it's 2 volumes. I think the newer editions are 1 paperback volume, Great Jewish Tales of the Occult or something like that. Yes.
Okay, so we can unshare, but people want to know the name of that book from Azriel Ben Sadok.
Okay, so let me, you can look it up as well as I can, but let me just try this.
Oh no, we'll look it up unless I thought you had it on your.
Walking Through the Fire.
Okay, so if you guys have issues at home or with your neighbor, is there a special curse or blessing we can do for a particular candidate that's running for office?
Oh, this is a non-political forum, Ari.
I didn't specify which one. I'm just.
Well, I just feel that the truth is that every day when I pray in the morning, I have a special, that you say, you bless the tzaddikim and you curse the evildoers, and I have a particular blessing and curse that I say that I think are apropos for our times and places. To whom you apply them, of course, is your mileage may vary.
Okay, I'm not telling you that Professor Samuel Gruber asked that question, but he is on, so I wanted to say hi to him. Rabbi Miriam Phelps wanted to know who the 19th century artist was that drew the image that you shared earlier. I don't know which image. I don't know.
Moshe Ephraim Lilien, Lilien. He was a great artist. You look him up, you'll see all kinds of, a lot of black and white. And he was a sort of proto-expressionist, right? So he was doing stuff around the turn of the 20th century.
Jeff Kaufman or Mary Kraft would like to know, did Freud comment on the Dybbuk?
Freud was, as you know, or perhaps you don't, quite tetchy and skittish. I love those 2 words, tetchy and skittish, probably better applied to horses, about his Jewishness. And, he would sooner have commented on Greek spirit possession than on Jewish spirit possession. I know of nowhere, and I read and memorized all the volumes of Freud's works in which he mentions Dybbukim. But it is very Freudian, obviously. Male, female, right? All of that.
Was spirit possession really that big a thing? I don't know if we can know it in the Jewish world before Shayansky's play, or did Shayansky's play make it a bigger phenomenon?
Oh, by the time Shayansky got to it, it was late in the day. You have to realize that what we call magic or spirit possession, or right, that was like, in a way, throughout all of Jewish history before Ansky, people's attitude toward illness and mental illness, right, was much like Chana Ravina in that funny, the Jews are coming, right? I have a cold, I must be possessed by the demon of cold, right? I'm bipolar, I must be, being pulled between 2 demons, right? That's how people explain the world. So demon possession was very, very much a thing. In fact, it was the only way that you explained illness. And that's why it's important to note, for instance, that in the New Testament, Jesus casts out demons, in which he's essentially performing the role of a doctor. So like many Jewish healers of his time and place, there was an association of sin and sinfulness with demons. If you were sinful, the demons had a way of getting into you and making you ill, either what we call mentally, emotionally, or physically. So yes, it was a thing. And what Ansky did was, when it was already, the age of reason and the age of medicine, sort of revivify the idea as a fairy tale.
How does it connect to our tradition in the Torah, which says that we shouldn't believe in these things?
Well, the fact that the Torah says you shouldn't believe in these things means that people were believing in them, right? When King Saul was seeking advice, he needed to talk to the prophet Samuel, but the prophet Samuel was dead, so he consulted the medium or the witch of Endor, right? So people did these things all the time. Dafka, if you see something in the Torah, like, you should not make a three-dimensional image and bow down to it of a fish, right? It means that people were making images of fish and bowing down to them, right? The Torah is prescriptive, it's true, but it is also descriptive. So one of the things we learn, the Torah says that you shouldn't, the tradition says you shouldn't depend on mazalot, on astrology and all of that. And yet there's a very strong tradition in Judaism that Abraham was an astrologer, because God says, go outside and see the stars, and thus shall your descendants be. What is thus shall your descendants be? Well, we normally take it to mean they will be as numerous as the stars. But many people understood that as thus shall the fate of your descendants be written in the stars. The important caveat for these sorts of necromantic and magical operations was that one could read in the stars what one's fate might be, but with prayer and sacrifice and application to God, one could alter that fate, right? And there were many rabbis in the Middle Ages who were both astronomers and astrologers, because those things went together. So it's a matter of shifting your perspective. You may think that these things are wild and outside of the purview of Judaism because that's what you've been taught about Judaism, but they were just a part of life then. To deny demons, to deny dybbukim would be like to deny gravity, because how could you explain that you had a cold or that you were schizophrenic or both?
Karen Zilberstein asked a question about the shofar and its use on high holidays. Is there a connection between that and what we just saw, its use in expelling evil?
So the shofar really gets its power from the story of the Akedah, right? Because the ram is the substitution for Isaac. And the shofar is this inarticulate right cry that Jews are all about words. The shofar is something that goes beyond that, right? And as such, because it's not about words, it is also prophylactic, not in the sense that a condom is, but in the sense that anything that fights something doesn't admit something you want not admitted is, and anti-demoniac. Why? Because demons, particularly demons in Jewish tradition, are very clever. They can twist words. You tell them, just think about the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Wasn't even a demon, right? The serpent said, did God really say that? So if you use words on a demon, then the demon can best you at that. But if you just kvetch, if you just call on God with the inarticulate sobbing of your heart, right, that has an effect. So the shofar is both. Many things in Jewish tradition are both what we would consider religious and superstitious. The key to understanding why that should be is because that membrane that we keep between those things now was at least semi-permeable, right, in previous times. Oh, these are such good, you got such good people, Ari. Well, I mean, I have a lot of great students at Vassar, but, these people are great. This is wonderful.
Yeah, and they've stuck like an extra 25 minutes. If this was a regular CSP program, I would, in person, I would have cut you off 25 minutes ago.
You have to pay me a quarter more.
No, that I wouldn't do. I'd pay you less if you go further.
Well, it's been nice knowing you all. Goodbye.
Yeah. Samuel Gruber showed us insides of synagogues, and many of the synagogues, the painted synagogues, had the mazalot in them, which is a very strange thing to have in your synagogue. We certainly don't put them in our synagogues now.
Okay, Ari, but let me put this to you. Let me put it to you this way, right?
Yes.
If I was going to build a new synagogue, Temple Beth Mammon Rodfei Kesef in Long Island, okay? I wanted to have a stained glass window that showed the glory of God in the universe. I would have a blue background with the swirling planets and the stars and the sun and the moon and a rainbow and all this stuff, right? In pre-modern times, the zodiac signs represented the way that God ordered the universe. So it's not that you depend on the zodiac as the secret for your life, right? Thank you, Lisa Siegel. He's not going to cut me off. I'll cut him off first. You know, this is how you thought of God's glory filling the universe. Okay, we have time for one more question, because you know why? Because I have to A, check the election results, B, go and shop for Shabbos, and C, start the challah. So,
okay, I guess one of the questions was, if you could choose anybody to remake a real good film contemporarily of the Dybbuk, who would you choose to be in it, and who would direct it?
you know, it's
not Martin Scorsese. Give me
it's not a likely choice, but remember last time we saw the prequel, the opening sequence of the Coen Brothers, right? Yeah, I would choose Wes Anderson or the Coen Brothers, because in a way, you know, once you've had Hannah Rovina, right? Once you've had all that shit, right? You can't go back, right? So there has to be, I mean, even the woman in the Coen Brothers who had this, you know, she had this suspicious, she was, yeah, he'll have a small scotch, please. Or was that your medication that they're bringing now? Okay. So, you know, you have to have a sort of semi-humorous take on this, because that's the direction we're going. I love you all. I'm so happy to see you. You have my email. You can write me, and I'm so looking forward to seeing you next week. I have to apologize. I know I'm off my feed. Ari was like, you know, checking his emails the whole time. I could see, but it's just been a very stressful week, as you can imagine, for lots of reasons. And oh, by the way, I'm doing a talk at the British Library sometime soon. I gave a talk at CSP about monsters. This, if you like monsters, this is a sort of continuation. I'm looking at creatures in art made for Jews that have human bodies, female bodies, and the heads of animals. And I'm trying to figure out what they're doing there. Ari, thank you so much.
I will share a link to that. When is that program?
I don't know, because it was supposed to be yesterday, but we had a fashka, so they're rescheduling it. I'll send it to you, and you can send it to all your people, okay?
Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Hope you learned lots about possession and demons today and our tradition. And if you're new, that is Marc Michael Epstein. Okay.
Okay.
Just expressing himself in this tense time.
Does anybody else do this? Okay, it's been lovely to see you.
Usually not on a Zoom with 70 other people. Okay, everybody.
70 people here? Oh my God, I thought it was just you, Ari. Okay. See you later. Bye-bye. Take care. Hang in there all.
Take care, everybody. If you're new, welcome to CSP. Okay. Art Fineglass, nice to meet you. Bye, Phyllis Gilmore. Good to see you too.